Welcome to Everyday Lessons Now with Dr. Amala Luncheon and yours truly, Jaiga. This is a special edition, a two-part series of a program taken from Intentional Talk Radio. This is part one of a two-part series.
Emotional intelligence, especially in the workplace. So in many instances, people would have gone through what is called sensitivity training, because that's probably the most commonly used organizational development tool. So it's sort of done in a laboratory setting where you bring employees in together, and there isn't a leader, and it's unstructured, and people interact with each other and so on. And then they have a chance to build and develop what the norms of that organization would be. So you get to understand how the other people that exist in your space function. And if listeners have gone to sensitivity training, they would be familiar. And now, it makes us think about what are the things that we can do differently, because we still have issues in the workplace. And yes, I'm sure sensitivity training continues, but there are things that you can do for yourself, which is where we know that emotional intelligence comes in. So if you're able to learn some of the things of some of the pillars and some of the things that you can do to help you along that journey, then, we're happy to help you get on your way with that. So one of the things that one of my favorite questions is, well, what can we do differently? And so I want to talk about the pillars of emotional intelligence a little. And so one of the first, and what I would consider probably the most important one, is self-awareness. And we talk about self-awareness a lot. And self-awareness we could use in many different areas, because you don't exist in a vacuum. And so you have to be able to, one, sort of think of who are you in the moment, in every moment where you are interacting with someone. Who am I in this moment? Am I the mother? Am I the teacher? Am I the sister? Am I,
the friend?
Yes, friend. And so that actually, as long as you can situate yourself, then you can move from there, because you don't exist in a vacuum. And so you have to relate. And just thinking about your self-awareness or thinking about self and having that awareness would allow you now to then interact with others in a way that you should be cognizant of. You need to understand, what if I do something, if I move something from one place to another, okay, if someone is looking for it and I don't tell them that I've moved it, then that could be a problem. And as we would say in the Caribbean, that's how the fight started.
Right.
So, want to make sure.
And also when we're talking about self, you have to remember, some people take the word self and misinterpret when we say being self-aware. Being self-aware is not you trying to be arrogant.
Not at
or
all.
Trying to show dominance and trying to plant your seed to say that I am here and I'm the boss. It's not that. Being self-aware, right. It's a skill set that you have to understand. You are self-aware and you're also aware of the people around you, and all the things that you need. As Dr. Amala just said, as that great analogy, if you move something from somewhere and you are physically seeing somebody scampering looking for it, and you want, some people have this knack, they want to hold on to that power, and they're not going to move until asked.
Right.
They're going to stay there, and they said, it's not my, if they're looking for it, come and ask me.
Yes.
That is not being self-aware. That is being selfish and being irresponsible. It's a difference. So it's a thin line, and we are here to just try and navigate through the things and kind of make it understand. If you apply, I will say, 60% of what we tell you tomorrow, and then next week you apply 75%, I'm guaranteeing you at the end of it, you are going to see results. You're going to churn results. You're going to get a better response from people you work with, even at home. In school, for those of you who maybe they're teachers listening, if you're a teacher and you're having issues in communicating with your students, maybe there's a bunch of kids who are unruly, you need to start to ask the right questions. And to do that, you need to be self-aware. You need to be observant. You need to listen to what the children are not saying, because a child might come to school and only be rowdy when asked a particular question.
Right.
Maybe why you have on that, or why you didn't do this today. And because the child might respond in a aggressive manner, because that's a trigger. You don't know what's happening at home. Maybe something at home is wrong, and that's why. So this is when we say being self-aware. is understanding, yes, one, yourself, but being very observant of everything around you.
And I like the example that I got last night when we had that discussion where one of the teachers said, listen, I need people to be talking about emotional intelligence in schools because I have students that are problematic. And if I say to them, listen, I'm going to call your parents, then it's like, okay, and
Yeah.
and I could not understand how that would be okay because even at my age, if somebody tells me they're going to call my parents, I'd be like, how can we fix this before it gets to that? That's what I would think. But just to have and he teaches children who are 11 to 14. So to be at that stage in life and be so defiant and so unafraid of authority, it really did make me think that yes, this is something that we definitely need to be talking about at the school level. So if teachers understand that it's an issue, then it gives them some kind of ability or some kind of power, really, so that they understand, listen, maybe there's another way that we can go about this, and you're able to get to the bottom of whatever it is troubling that child. So those things are really important. So yes, again, that is self-awareness. Then the second one that we want to talk about now is self-management. So once you've been able to identify the emotions and you are aware that these things are bothering you, then how you manage what you've just understood is also important.
Very.
So instead of just flying off the handle or whatever, how you manage being angry. Do you just decide to go for a walk? Do you journal? I know one of your favorites, Darren, is advocating for journaling.
I advocate to journal your thoughts down. If you're in a confrontational settings, the smartest thing to do, well, that's my humble advice, is to write it down, write how you feel. And it's very important to articulate your feelings. For many of us, the struggle is to express how we feel. That's how emotional intelligence, it really comes in handy when you are in a place where you can articulate how you're feeling in any particular moment. Because sometimes you might see, let's say we lose a child, for instance, crying, and you will want to know why is he crying. The child might be able to express why. And even as adults, something might happen and you will see somebody moping or feeling bad, and they might not be able to articulate what it is, and we might misinterpret why you're feeling how you're feeling, because it isn't necessarily like Dr. Mal always gives this story. I'm going to jump the gun and give it for her, an experience she had with her nephew when they told him he was unable to speak to his dad on a particular day. And he was like, what are you talking about? I spoke to him earlier on that day. And they told him, listen, where he's going to now, he's not going to have Wi-Fi and he's not going to be able to speak to you. And he appeared to be upset. But when they asked, are you upset? It wasn't about him being upset. He just didn't understand, because to him it made no sense. Because I spoke to him a couple hours before, you're telling me I can't know. So he was in a state of confusion as opposed to being in a state of... And if the right questions wasn't asked, his mom and his siblings could have walked away thinking he's upset, when really and truly he's not upset at all. He's just confused and he wanted an answer. So this is how it's very important to articulate how you feel. And for those of you who struggle with that, that is why I always advocate for writing it down, because society and the world has gone into a social media frame now where everything is about a WhatsApp or sending an email, and the same energy you have to write on a WhatsApp is the same energy you can have to go on notes. Or maybe, I'm not suggesting you get a pen and a pad, because we know that is kind of, for some people, a pen and a pad, nobody uses those anymore. So you can go to your notes. Most smartphones have things that you can use. You can go to your laptop and in any little corner and write exactly how you feel in that moment. And I can guarantee you, when you revisit that, what you wrote, 25 minutes later, your feelings might change. That if you were angry, you might not be as angry. And then if you are angry about something that was said to you or something that was done, you can be able to now manage that relationship with whoever it is you having the discussion with. So that's how we speak on those things, and it's very, very important to do that.
I have a 9-year-old niece who, if she's upset, she would draw. And I remember her mom said to me, she said, oh, Auntie, I'm going to draw you So her mom was like a little bit concerned. And then she came back and it was a nice drawing. So I said, well, you looked kind of, apprehensive in the beginning. And she said, yes, because usually when she draws people, she's upset. So you actually don't want her to draw you.
Right.
So, she's able to distinguish between, her mom didn't know which one it would be. But then when she came back with it, her mom was relieved that it was a good drawing. So
because a bad drawing means that she's upset.
Right. And she would draw and then write a note on it saying, whatever.
Right.
And I find them funny because, I don't have to discipline her, but her parents understand that if she's going to draw something, then maybe this is something that we're going to need to address, because she would just draw it and then stick it up and you pass it like, well, what is this? And then you know exactly what it is. And she's going to wait for you to come to her to talk about it. So if at 9 years old, a child can find a coping mechanism, because she's not going to throw a tantrum or whatever. She's just going to draw this and leave it here and you'll find it. So I think that people have different ways of coping and of expressing themselves and of managing whatever emotions they have. And we need to be able to identify them. And then that brings us to the next one, which is social awareness. So if you're in a situation and you know that when someone gets angry, this is what they would do, you are socially aware now of some of the things, some of what their triggers are and so on, and you know how to deal with things when you see them. And that becomes important, because if you are, first of all, unaware of your surroundings and the things that are going on, and you're completely oblivious, something happens and you're unable to read these social cues, then those are things that could spell disaster if we're not careful. So we ought to be cognizant of how people react in situations, and you can always figure out if your coworker is happy by something they do or if they're not. And also, the very first way that we've been taught to do things, you ask a question.
That is good. But
we continually, try to read people's minds, and that is where we get into trouble. Mm-hmm. You cannot assume that because somebody's quiet or somebody is they have headphones on the train, or they're just not paying attention. No, they may be listening to something. They may be quite happy and in their own little world. But you have to ask, because not everything is written on someone's face. And we have to be able to interpret, as you just said, what they're not saying.
What they're not saying. And in doing so, also understand that people have to be given their space and their time, because everybody's speed is different. Mm-hmm. With grief, especially with grief like you, or a breakup, anything dealing with pain and sadness, somebody might see them bounce back real quick and you think they're okay. It's because they could be masking something. And you, if you're not self-aware, you too might be part of the problem, because you might ask the wrong questions or operate with them in the wrong mindset. They come to work and you say, nah, she cool. And you go to them with something that she's not really cool with or he's not really cool with, and it triggers something else. And we're speaking about the workplace, but all of the things we talk about with emotional intelligence comes back to home, because we take for granted that your workspace is a space that you spend so much time in that you need to only focus on that. But that's where we talk about work-life balance. If your home is not balanced as well, you're going to encounter problems, because people come to home, they're new relationships where there's a particular story that I know of as kind of real, like, somebody went through something and jump into something else, and in that situation and in that space never healed from the last thing, and this you in a limbo, and every time they go to work they pretend that work is the safe space, but work is not the safe space, and the people in work thinking that the home is good, and it's a topsy-turvy kind of situation, and you find yourself lost. And these are the things that cripple individuals, because when you fall apart and everything goes downhill, it's very, very hard to come out. As we say, when you go down a rabbit hole, it's always hard to come out. So the lessons of emotional intelligence is a kind of preventative situation where we try to make sure you have the tools you need in everyday life. Hence why we call it everyday lessons. And one of the things we always say, the everyday lessons in emotional intelligence. When you hear the word intelligence, it doesn't mean an IQ-based situation. You don't have to have a PhD to be emotionally intelligent. And
At all.
something we
that's
heard
one of the
last night
things.
too.
Oh yes,
That was
I have
brilliant.
that. I have that written down. I want to talk about it. But before we get to that one, I want to say something that our favorite 75-year-old vet said last night. He said he thought that it was important for international managers to understand a culture before just getting dropped into it, or it is incumbent on the organization to train managers before they go. And the example that he gave was someone who left wherever they were to work in a culture in the Far East.
Yeah, Vietnam.
And no, he
was in Vietnam. Right, correct,
he was in Vietnam, but this was going to study the culture in the Far East and going to work as a manager in the Far East. And you may not understand why people need to pray at specific times of the day.
Yes,
your work needs to get done. And all you are concerned about is your quotas and why are these people leaving my work to do whatever? Because you have not been sufficiently prepped. You don't understand diversity. You're not speaking to anybody about it and they say, well, we need to get people who are going to get this done. That is their culture. Then you go home now and you have a wife who does not understand that you're dealing with all these issues at work. And she says something that could be considered off-colored. And you explode.
Not only that, he also mentioned that you have a wife who's now home, who's a housewife, who doesn't also understand the culture of the place. And she wants to do things that is contrary to the culture in her own space. So her trigger is that she's unhappy and is telling you that, but you too don't understand the culture. So now home is in a problem. And that all stems from your higher up manager and the management, the executive of your company was not self-aware enough to do the study, to train you, to send you. So that could have been prevented if if they realize, okay, maybe Jonathan is not the person for this particular duty station, we'll find someone else because Jonathan, his wife, his kids, they might not be prepared, and that the blame falls on the upper management for not being self-aware, for not understanding.
But also, in that situation, I would say if someone is high enough in an organization to be sent out as a manager, I think the onus is on them to figure out, what is the culture of the place that I'm walking into. So I would say that at that level in an organization, you have to do some of your homework as well. But I took his point because it's a real situation. And if we're talking about work-life balance, and if we're being honest, a lot of people just don't have work-life balance, so that sort of thing I thought was incredibly important for us to understand and be able to articulate as is necessary. So that was one story that I certainly wanted to share. Then we spoke about relationship management because that's the next pillar of emotional intelligence. And everything we just said there is, really being able to manage those relationships as long as you understand who you are and you're able to express and you're socially aware and so on. One of the other stories that I thought was really interesting and I wanted to share that was when we met with Ambassador Hines from Guyana. He told us about when he worked in the mining industry. And this was several years ago, decades ago at this point. So this was in the early 1970s. And Guyana is a mineral-rich country, for those who don't know. And at the time, there was bauxite mining that was controlled by the British. And one of the things he said is, if you would come back to Guyana as a graduate, you could get a job like in middle management. However, upper management was controlled by British whites. And then there'd be middle management, which some of them could have been Guyanese because they had come back from studying. And then you had resident Guyanese who would work sort of like on the lowest tier.
Yeah, like the workers, the laborers per se.
Yes. And so they're on the lowest tier of whatever organization. So in this case, they were at a bauxite mining plant. And one of the things that he found stood out to him was that strata and how divided it was. And he found a way to bridge that gap by ensuring that he understood what the people at the lowest level were doing. Then he was in the middle, and he also understood what his bosses were doing. And one of my takeaways from that, because he's still very keen to understand and appreciate, he could manage up. And I like the manage up mentality, because it gives you the ability to put yourself in a position where if people have questions, you've done the work to understand how to answer the questions that they have. If people that you supervise have questions, you've already done what they do. And so anything that they come to ask you, you can do it. And I think as middle managers, you have a responsibility to actually understand what the people you're supervising are doing. And so I know that now in a number of organizations, not just work, but in a number of places where people are, heads of committees and that sort of thing, not everyone has a full understanding of what the people who are in their charge are doing. And they, in many instances, do not manage up. So when someone asks for information, they need to go get that information now, as opposed to having it.
Correct.
And I think that was such an interesting thing that I really wanted to make note of it, because in many of our organizations, we still have that strata.
And last night we had the flip coming from Neighbor when she spoke about people who go through the ranks to high management because of service.
Right.
You started the company and you reach up the rank of service, but then you get a boss who now comes in because of qualifications.
Right.
And there's a big gap there.
There's a huge divide.
Huge divide. And how does somebody manage that divide? And we spoke about that last night, how it's a difficult situation, but you too have to be self-aware within self. That's why it always comes back to self. Because if you are the person on the end of the intellectual coming in, if you're not self-aware, you are then going to be snubbed at by the person who came through the ranks, because they're not going to understand that you just come into the company, you don't understand how things work, you feel because you have 2 degrees, that's the emotion of that person is going to shine through. And if you are not grounded and you are not self-aware, you would not know how to manage that and how to get that person and you to work in a proper manner. Yes, so those are the things. And so every time we talk about a scenario, and for anybody listening, and I could think about just about anybody in any walks of life, how important it is to have emotional intelligence. You'll be talking about at any level, and it does not. I think now we could segue into what I wanted to talk about earlier.
Yes.
Now we could segue into that. Thank you for listening to part 1 of a 2-part series. Join us next week for part 2.